Good evening. Again, my name is Lauren Parrott. I'm 24 years old, and I have multiple sclerosis. And I'm here today to share my experiences with having MS. And I would really like to thank Biogen IDEC for sponsoring me here. And I hope that I can be helpful, and I hope I can answer any questions that you may have, especially about Tysabri. I know during dinner we've already been talking about Tysabri, but as I start, I would just like to say that after having MS for 8 years, I've come to realize that staying positive is definitely what has allowed me to live my life as normal as possible while having MS. I've also come to realize that I may be a bit overly positive, maybe annoyingly so, but I feel better about myself when I am positive. And of course, there are times where it's a little bit more difficult to see the positive in certain situations, like having a relapse, or not being able to work at a full-time job, or also not liking the medication that you're taking. And I'm trying to make the best of everything. I try to find the positives in every single situation. And later I'll be sharing with you how I got through my first relapse, how I found a job that suits me, and how I discovered that Tysabri is definitely the best medication that I have ever taken. The most important thing for me is to keep myself surrounded by positive people, because when I'm with positive people, they make me feel better about myself. The reason why staying positive is so important is because I can function better when I'm positive. I try really hard to stretch my muscles every day, and I try to work out on my elliptical as much as I can. It's pretty much the only exercise that I can do right now, but I try to do that, and I do not get overheated. My body pretty much tells me when I've had enough, and I just try to make the best of every situation. I eat healthy. I have lots of fruits and vegetables, drink lots of water, even though I just ate a cannoli. I try to eat as healthy as possible. And I smile all the time, and I have always been a really positive person ever since I was a little kid, but I feel like when I'm positive, I just feel a lot better about myself, and I can function better. And my family really keeps me going. My parents are here tonight, they're really supportive. My older brother Joel is very helpful for me. He was hoping that 75% of my speech tonight was going to be about him, but I told him, I said, Joel, I really am supposed to be focusing on MS. So, but also my boyfriend Anthony is really wonderful because he's been very understanding, and we've been together for 8 years. So he was with me before, during, and after my diagnosis, and he said it's easier for him to handle my MS in our relationship because I'm so positive. So that's how we get through our relationship with me having MS. When I'm negative, I really can't function at all. I tend to focus more on the things that I can't do. Like I can't run anymore. I used to be an avid runner, and I can't do that. So sometimes when I'm having a bad day, or I start getting depressed, and I start comparing myself to other people, and I say, they have no idea what I'm going through on a daily basis. And I start focusing on the negative things in my life. And then I think about it, and it's like, you know what? I have so many things that I am able to do, and I should really focus on the positive. And I feel so much better about myself. I briefly want to talk about my story. We all have a different story, but I was really young when I was diagnosed. I was 16 years old, and my 17-year-old cousin Adam was killed in a car accident, and it was extremely devastating. And because I was so young, it made me realize how fragile life is. I started tripping and falling after he passed away. I noticed that my left leg was extremely weak, and I was in high school, so it was very depressing. My hair was falling out in chunks. I had cysts on my face. I was extremely emotional. It was actually very annoying, mostly for me, but other people found it really annoying as well. So that was really hard for me. And people called me stupid in high school because I had cognitive problems, but at the time I didn't realize that I actually had cognitive issues. So I slipped into a deep depression. I was between the ages of 16 and 18, I was very depressed. And I finally went to see some doctors. I went to a neurologist, and he gave me an MRI and a spinal tap, and I received my diagnosis 5 days before I graduated from high school. And that was really hard for me, but it was also a relief. I knew that there was a problem, and getting the diagnosis was actually better than what I was expecting. I thought that I had brain cancer. So I actually thought that I was on my deathbed. But getting the MS diagnosis was actually a relief. So also I wanted to talk about how I didn't have a relapse before I got my diagnosis. So MS was really not blatantly obvious. If I knew there was a problem, I just didn't know what it was. So the diagnosis was actually a big relief for me. And I decided not to tell my family and friends right away. It was very overwhelming. And I had to get through my graduation. I had to deliver a speech. And I had to sing the national anthem by myself at my high school graduation. So it was an incredibly overwhelming experience. But I got through it. And I'm really proud of myself for how I was able to accomplish those things. And when I did decide to tell my friends and family that I had this diagnosis, I was very positive. And I said, I've already been dealing with this for 2 years, and I'm going to be okay. And I think it was easier for them to handle. I first started on Copaxone, which I took for 1 year, and then I switched to Betaseron, which I took for 4 years, and that was during college. And then after I graduated from college, I had to get a job. I have a background in television, and I had always thought that I was going to go into that after I graduated. But in order to pursue television, I would have had to move to a smaller town or another state. So I decided that I would stay closer to home and get a few part-time jobs. But the jobs that I got were actually very physically demanding. And I was having a lot of trouble. I decided not to tell my employers that I had MS because I didn't want to be discriminated against. So I didn't say anything, but it was very challenging for me physically. I quit those jobs, and I got my first full-time job, and it was a sales job where I sold urinal mats. I sold bathroom supplies and urinal mats. And I didn't really like that job. And the experiences that I've had in television, having that kind of sales job was just not something for me. And I was very, very stressed. And I told my family, I said, I need to switch jobs. But it got to the point where my hands started trembling, and then my head started shaking. And I thought that it was just because of stress, because I didn't like my job. So I was looking for other jobs, but I didn't quit my sales job in time because I ended up getting in a rollover car accident on I-96. Luckily, I walked away from the accident with just a few cuts and bruises, and nobody else, I hit the wall, so nobody else was hurt. But it turns out that that was the very beginning of my first exacerbation. And at that point, I decided that I'm going to tell my employer that I have MS because I don't want it to affect my health. And if they don't want to hire me because I have MS, then I don't want to work there. The first exacerbation was one of the scariest things in my life. And if you've had one, you can relate. But I couldn't walk, I had double vision, so I couldn't really see. I couldn't read, I had horrible tremors, I had a shaky voice, and I couldn't play the piano or sing, which are things that I do to relieve stress and relieve tension in my life. So it was absolutely awful. And I was just talking to someone at my table. I didn't have a relapse for 7.5 years. So it was just a shock for me. I didn't